The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of a street lamp outside the cracked window. Inside, a man sat alone, a recorder strapped beneath his shirt. His heart beat louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every word he was about to capture could mean salvation for him or death before dawn. The family he was about to betray had ruled for decades, their empire built on fear, blood, and loyalty sworn on pain of death. To defy them was unthinkable. To expose them was suicide. And yet, one wire would change everything. One night would bring down a dynasty that thought itself untouchable. This is the story of how betrayal was planted not with bullets or knives, but with a whisper recorded in the dark. The city slept uneasy, its shadows crawling with whispers no one dared to speak aloud. In the old quarter, where cobblestones still remembered the weight of horse-drawn carriages and the iron scent of blood spilled long ago, the dynasty reigned. They weren't kings with crowns or presidents with ballots, but their rule was unquestioned. Their name carried more weight than any law, and their word carried more fear than any sentence handed down by a judge. They called themselves businessmen. Everyone else called them untouchable. At the heart of that family empire stood a house, not ornate or gilded, but heavy with history. Bricks blackened from decades of smoke and rain, shutters closed like tired eyes, gates forged to keep out strangers. Inside that house, beneath low-hanging chandeliers and the smell of aged leather and cigars, decisions were made that shifted the tides of the city. Men came and went, whispers followed, debts were collected, and silence was bought with cash or broken bones. It was into this world that the informant had been born, though he never imagined his life would bend the way it did. He wasn't an outsider they pulled in. He wasn't a stranger seeking favor. He was blood. A cousin twice removed, raised at the long tables during Sunday dinners, given envelopes to hand out on street corners before he was old enough to shave. The family was his shield, his pride, his prison. But prison walls eventually close in, no matter how gilded they seem at first. The first crack came not with violence, but with debt. The informant, let's call him Michael, though in truth that was only one of the many names he'd carried, had made mistakes. Gambling tables, women promises to men with eyes colder than winter steel. He thought the family would protect him, cover the debts, pull him back from the cliff. Instead, he was told to fix it himself. Loyalty, after all, was not a one-way street. The second crack came from the law. They'd been circling him for months, watching, waiting, swooping down when he was most vulnerable. Two agents in dark suits, their shoes wet with rain as they sat across from him in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and old grease. They spoke with quiet certainty, not threats, but truths. Prison was waiting, 20 years minimum. His debts would follow him inside, and the family wouldn't pay them off. His life, as it stood, was already over, unless he gave them something. He laughed at first, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. Betrayal was unthinkable. You didn't betray blood. You didn't betray the men who had pulled you from gutters, who had paid your rent, who had buried your mistakes. But the laughter died when the agent slid photographs across the table, pictures of his daughter walking to school, of his ex-wife locking her door at night, of his mother, frail, alone, clinging to her rosary. They didn't threaten them outright. They didn't have to. The family's enemies were many, and the agents only had to suggest what might happen if Michael didn't act. So he listened. For the first time in his life, he listened not as a loyal cousin, but as a man with no way out. They didn't want much at first, just conversations, whispers, patterns of movement. But soon it became clear. One night, one recording, could bring everything crashing down. The agents promised him freedom, relocation, a new life, witness protection, a chance to breathe without fear, a chance to live without looking over his shoulder. All he had to do was wear the wire. The night chosen for it wasn't random. The family was meeting to settle disputes over territory, an internal matter, one that promised heated words and perhaps worse. Every ranking member would be present. Decisions spoken aloud in that room would be enough to sink them all if they were ever heard beyond its walls. The agents knew it. Michael knew it. The family didn't. On the day of the meeting, Michael woke with the weight of his choice pressing down on him like a stone. The city outside looked unchanged. The same smoke rising from chimneys, the same merchants calling from doorways, the same taxis splashing through puddles. But for him, everything was altered. He moved through the morning like a ghost, sipping bitter coffee that turned to acid in his stomach, smoking cigarette after cigarette until the filter burned his fingers. His hand shook. His reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked like a stranger's. He told himself over and over, survive this night, say the right things, smile at the right moments. Don't let them hear your heart pounding through your chest. The agents met him hours before the meeting in a nondescript motel room where the curtains never opened and the air stank of mildew. They strapped the wire to his chest, small, nearly invisible, cold against his skin. They tested it with quiet words, his voice trembling as it traveled through walls and into a recorder held steady by one of the agents. Don't think about the wire, one of them told him, his voice flat, clinical. Think about survival. You walk in, you walk out, you're done. One night, Michael, that's all. Michael nodded, though his throat was dry and his legs felt like hollow sticks about to splinter. He thought of his daughter's face. He thought of his debts piling like corpses. He thought of the family's eyes if they ever discovered what he carried under his shirt. Death wouldn't be slow. It wouldn't be merciful. It would be loud, bloody, and final. By evening, the house loomed before him, its windows glowing with warm light that did nothing to ease the chill in his bones. He walked up the steps with the gait of a man carrying 1,000 invisible chains. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, laughter, voices raised in argument. Men slapped each other on the back, glasses clinked, knives sliced through thick cuts of meat. Life, as always, seemed normal in the family's house of power. No one looked at him twice as he entered. Why would they? He was blood. He was trusted. He had sat at this table 100 times before. He hugged uncles, cousins, men he had once idolized, men he had once feared. Their cologne mixed with the smoke. Their voices thundered in his ears, every word a reminder of what he was about to steal from them. The meeting began as it always did. Banter, jokes, small disputes, smoothed over with laughter. But then the tone shifted. Voices sharpened. Maps were unfolded. Territories marked. Alliances debated. Promises were made. Threats delivered. Michael sat among them, nodding, speaking when spoken to, every nerve in his body screaming. The wire against his chest felt like a burning brand. Every movement made him fear they would hear the faint crackle of betrayal. But no one noticed. They argued, they cursed, they planned, and all the while the recorder in his shirt captured every word. Conversations that would later be dissected by agents in sterile rooms. Voices of men who believed themselves immortal, echoing in government files. At one point, a hand clapped down on his shoulder, a cousin, drunk, laughing, leaning close enough that Michael could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're too quiet tonight," the cousin said, eyes narrowed. "What's wrong with you, eh?" Michael forced a smile, his jaw aching from the strain. "Just tired," he said, voice steady, though his pulse hammered against his ribs. "Long day." The cousin laughed, slapped his back, and turned away. But for Michael, it was as if he had brushed against death itself. His skin prickled with cold sweat. He swallowed hard, steadying himself with a sip of wine that tasted like ashes in his mouth. The night stretched on, every second a lifetime. He told himself again and again, just make it through. Just one night, just one wire, just one betrayal that would echo forever. When the meeting finally broke, when chairs scraped against the floor and men stood shaking hands, making promises, sealing fates, Michael walked out with them. He forced laughter. He clapped backs. He kissed cheeks. He spoke as though nothing had shifted in the world. The recorder beneath his shirt was silent now, its task complete, its memory heavy with the weight of empire-shattering words. Outside the air was cool, the moon pale above the rooftops. Michael lit a cigarette with trembling hands, smoke rising in shaky spirals. No one stopped him. No one suspected. He was blood. He was trusted. He was invisible. And yet, with every step away from that house, he felt the invisible wall between him and them grow taller, thicker, colder. He had crossed a line no one could ever return from. In one night, with one wire, he had set fire to the dynasty that raised him. And though no flames were yet visible, though the house behind him still glowed warm with laughter and light, he knew it was already burning. The night after the meeting, Michael barely slept. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, smoke curling from the cigarette pressed between his lips until it burned down to his fingers. He didn't feel alive, so much as suspended in some cold space between survival and death. The recorder was gone from his chest, handed back to the agents in the same motel room where they'd strapped it on. But the weight of it remained. His skin still itched where the tape had held it in place. His ears still rang with the sound of voices that should never have left that room. He thought of them, his uncles, his cousins, his blood. They had laughed with him, trusted him, called him family, while the wire hummed quietly under his shirt. He thought of their faces, if they ever learned what he had done, how betrayal was not a wound that healed, but a sentence that lasted until the grave. He told himself again and again that he had no choice. He told himself he was cornered, forced, manipulated by debts and agents with files thicker than his arm. But no matter how he spun it, no matter how many times he whispered excuses into the smoke-filled dark, the truth pressed down heavier. He had betrayed them. The following morning, 2 men waited for him outside his building. Not the agents, family. One leaned against a car with polished chrome. The other smoked lazily with a fedora tilted low to shade his eyes. They weren't smiling. They weren't frowning either. Just waiting, watching. Shadows carved from bone and leather. Michael's throat closed. For a moment, he thought they knew. For a moment he thought the recorder had been discovered, that his betrayal had already surfaced, that his life was about to end there on the cracked pavement of his own street. But when he approached, one of them simply said, "Boss wants to see you." Michael nodded, as if this were just another summons, as if his heart wasn't clawing at his ribs like a trapped animal. He slid into the back seat of the car, the leather cold beneath him. They drove through the city in silence, past streets he'd known since childhood, past shops where men nodded to him out of habit, past the church where his mother still lit candles for his soul. The ride was short, but it stretched long enough for his imagination to script every possible ending. He pictured himself dragged into a basement, hands bound, the wire discovered, the knives waiting. He pictured his body dumped in the river, nameless and swollen by dawn. But when the car stopped, it wasn't at some basement or warehouse. It was at the house again, the same place where he'd sat wired just the night before. He was led inside, past the heavy door, past the smell of smoke and wood polish, into the study where the boss sat waiting. The boss wasn't family by blood, but he might as well have been. He had raised Michael like a son, trusted him, scolded him, praised him. His presence filled the room even when he didn't move, a gravity that bent others into silence. He sat behind the desk now, cigar in hand, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "Michael," he said, voice low, steady, "sit." Michael sat, forcing his hands to stay still on his knees. The boss puffed the cigar, smoke curling upward like a ghost. "You were quiet last night." Michael's throat was dry. He swallowed once, nodded. "Just, tired. Long day." The boss's eyes lingered on him as if weighing something invisible. Then he nodded slowly. "We've all been tired. Still, you did good being there. Family first, eh?" "Always," Michael said, his voice steady, though his chest felt like it would cave in. The boss leaned back, exhaled smoke. "We've got rough times ahead. The law's sniffing around more than usual. We've got rats in the neighborhood, people talking who shouldn't be. But we keep our circle tight, we stay strong, and nobody breaks us. You understand?" Michael nodded again, the word rat digging into him like a nail. The boss smiled faintly then, a smile without warmth. "Good. Because in times like these, loyalty is all that matters." He tapped ash into the tray. "You go home, take care of your mother, keep your head clean. Leave the heavy work to us." Michael thanked him, stood, walked out. His legs nearly gave way the moment he was beyond the study door. The men in the hall nodded to him, none the wiser, and he forced his body to carry him outside, into the sunlight, into air that felt both heavier and freer than before. Back in the car with the two men, back on the street outside his apartment, Michael knew one thing with certainty. They didn't know. Not yet. The wire was still his secret. The betrayal was still hidden. But suspicion was always near, circling like vultures. That night, he met the agents again. They had listened to the tape already. Their faces betrayed no emotion as they slid papers across the table, notes scribbled with times, names, voices. Michael sat across from them, hands clenched, as they spoke in low tones. "This is gold," one said. "You don't realize what you've done. This is enough to tear the walls down. We've got them on conspiracy, racketeering, extortion, hell, even murder if we cross-reference the timelines." Michael nodded, though his stomach turned. He didn't want to hear the words. He didn't want to know how damning his betrayal was. He didn't want to picture the family dragged in cuffs, their eyes on him, their mouths spitting curses through the bars. "You did good," the other agent said. "Better than good. But this isn't over. We'll need more. Meetings like this don't happen every week. We need steady information until we can time the takedown." Michael's breath caught. "You said one night," he whispered. The agent's gaze was cold. "One night gave us evidence. But evidence needs to build. You're in this until we say otherwise. Unless you want 20 years. Michael's chest tightened. He realized then that freedom was a word the agents used like a knife. They dangled it just far enough to keep him moving, but never close enough to let him hold it. He wasn't free. He was trapped. Only now, in two prisons. The family's suspicion on one side, the agent's demands on the other. The days blurred. He lived in constant dread, every knock on his door a threat, every laugh from a cousin at the bar a potential test. He smoked until his fingers yellowed, drank until the burn of whiskey dulled the noise in his head. At night, he dreamed of discovery, hands tearing open his shirt, the wire gleaming in the light, voices rising in rage before darkness swallowed him. He woke, drenched in sweat, gasping, only to drag himself back into the daylight where the family watched him with the same trust they always had. But cracks appeared. One evening, his cousin Angelo cornered him outside the club, eyes narrowed. "You've been off lately," Angelo said, "jumping at shadows. You got something you want to say?" Michael forced a laugh, though his chest tightened. "Just tired. Too many late nights." Angelo studied him, silent for too long. Then he nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. "Yeah, maybe." He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating suspicion etched across his face. "Get some rest. We can't afford weak links." Michael walked away with his skin prickling. Weak links, rats, betrayal. The words followed him, hounded him, gnawed at him until every face looked like a threat, every conversation like a test. Meanwhile, the agents grew hungrier. They pressed him for more. Details of shipments, names of collectors, whispers of murders never solved. He resisted at first, shaking his head, saying he couldn't, saying they'd kill him if they even suspected. But the agents only leaned closer, their voices calm, their eyes cold. "You want to live?" they asked. "Then you'll do it. Otherwise, you're already dead." And so he agreed again and again, each time telling himself it would be the last, each time sinking deeper until the wire was not just a device but a part of him, a parasite feeding on every word he spoke, every breath he took. He began to notice things differently. The family's laughter sounded hollow now, their smiles sharp, their hands heavy on his shoulder like weights. He noticed how their eyes lingered when he spoke, how their conversation shifted when he entered the room. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, paranoia became his shadow, whispering louder with each passing day. And yet, he played his role. He sat at the tables. He raised his glass. He kissed cheeks. He spoke words of loyalty with a tongue made of lies. Inside, though, he counted down the days, hours, minutes, until the walls came crashing down. He didn't know when. He didn't know how. He only knew that the fire he had lit with one wire was spreading, unseen, unstoppable. One night, months after the first recording, he left a meeting early. He walked through the dark streets alone, coat pulled tight against the wind, his footsteps echoing on the stones. Behind him, somewhere in the shadows, he swore he heard another step, lighter but steady, following. He quickened his pace, heart hammering, breath ragged. He turned corners sharply, eyes darting to reflections in shop windows, alleys, doorways. The step followed. He reached his apartment, fumbling with the key, nearly dropping it. He slipped inside, slammed the door, bolted it, pressed his back against the wood. The silence on the other side stretched long, too long. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, eyes locked on the door, waiting. But no knock came, no break-in, just bare silence. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe paranoia had finally devoured him whole. Or maybe the family had started to suspect, and the shadows outside his door were only the beginning. Michael's world was narrowing. Every street corner, every handshake, every glance carried the weight of suspicion. He could no longer tell if the family truly trusted him or if they were simply waiting, biding their time, watching from the shadows until the right moment to strike. His nerves were a violin string pulled too tight, ready to snap at the slightest touch. The agents told him he was doing good work. They spoke in calm, measured voices in their motel rooms and government offices, surrounded by the sterile hum of machines and the stale smell of cheap coffee. They told him the recordings he'd brought them were enough to build a mountain of indictments. They told him patience was key. "We can't move too soon," one said. "If we strike too early, we only catch a few. We need them all." But patience wasn't something Michael had left. Every day felt like walking across thin ice, cracks spiderwebbing beneath his feet. He knew one slip meant death. Not a clean death either, but one that would stretch out in a basement somewhere, lit by a single bulb, punctuated by laughter and screams. The family wasn't blind either. The law was pressing closer. 2 neighborhood fronts had been raided, a gambling den shut down, trucks pulled over with suspicious precision. Whispers of informants began to spread, thick and poisonous, winding through the air like smoke. In the family, suspicion was a plague. It didn't matter if you were innocent. Once the word rat was whispered near your name, it clung forever. One evening, Michael sat at the long table in the house again. The same table that had heard decades of decisions and toasts. The men were restless, snapping at each other, their usual calm eroded by the mounting pressure. Angelo, his cousin, slammed a hand on the wood so hard the glasses rattled. "We got leaks," Angelo said, eyes flashing. "The cops ain't this lucky. Somebody's talking." A murmur ran through the room. Eyes flicked from face to face, weighing, judging. Michael sat still, the wire on his chest alive, capturing every word. His mouth was dry, his hands cold. Another cousin leaned forward, voice low. "We find the rat. We make an example. No trials, no mercy." The boss sat back, cigar smoke curling upward, his gaze unreadable. He let the argument swell, voices rising, accusations hinted but never named. Finally he spoke, his voice slicing through the noise like a knife. "We don't panic," he said. "Panic kills more than cops. We tighten the circle. We watch closer. And if there is a rat—" He paused, letting the silence hang. "We'll know. And when we do, he won't see daylight again." Michael nodded with the others, but inside his chest his heart clawed. The words burrowed deep. "We'll know." He wondered if the boss's eyes lingered on him a second too long, if the smoke curling from the cigar was pointing at him, if the silence was a noose tightening around his throat. After the meeting, Angelo caught him outside, hand heavy on his shoulder. "You got quiet feet lately," Angelo said. "Where you been at nights?" Michael forced a grin. "Home, drinking, trying to stay out of trouble." Angelo's eyes didn't leave his. "Yeah, stay out of trouble. Trouble finds its way back, you know?" The hand released, but the words clung like ice. Later, in the motel room with the agents, Michael's voice cracked as he spoke. "They're sniffing me out. They're talking about rats every night. They'll kill me if they find out." The agent, the one with the calm eyes, leaned forward. "Then you don't give them a reason to. You play it cool. You stay close. The closer you are, the safer you are." Michael shook his head. "Safer? There's no safe. You promised one night, one wire. Now I'm dying every day." The agent's voice hardened. "And you'll keep dying until this is finished. You want it out, we're giving you out. But it doesn't come free." Michael stared at him, realization dawning like frost. The family had raised him to believe loyalty was a cage. But the law was no different. Both sides had shackled him. Both sides demanded everything. Weeks turned to months. Michael became a ghost of himself. Thin, hollow-eyed, his nerves raw. He drank to numb it, smoked until his lungs burned. He walked the streets with the weight of unseen eyes drilling into his back. Every time he lit a cigarette in an alley, he expected a blade at his throat. Every time he slid into bed, he expected the door to break open before dawn. Then one night, the call came. A meeting. Not the usual kind, not business as usual. A closed meeting, small circle only. The boss, Angelo, two others. Michael was summoned without choice. His stomach twisted, bile rising in his throat. He knew what small meetings meant. Sometimes they were talks. Sometimes they were trials. Sometimes they were executions. He strapped on the wire anyway. The agents insisted. "This is it," they told him. "This could be the night. Get us what we need and you'll never have to do this again." He didn't believe them anymore, not fully, but he had no choice. He walked to the house through streets heavy with fog, every shadow a figure, every sound an omen. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with cigar smoke and silence. The boss sat behind his desk. Angelo leaned in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The other two sat in the dark, faces half hidden. "Michael," the boss said softly, "sit." Michael sat, his heart hammering so hard he thought they must hear it, must feel it through the floor. The boss studied him, silent for too long. Finally he spoke. "There's talk. Talk of a rat in the family. Talk the law knows more than they should." Michael swallowed. His tongue felt like ash. "People talk." "People die for talk," Angelo said, voice cold. The boss raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Michael. "You've been with us a long time, Blood. We trust blood, but blood ain't thicker than loyalty, you understand?" Michael nodded slowly. "I understand." The boss leaned back, smoke curling. "Good. Then tell me, Michael, if you were me, who would you watch? Who would you trust least?" The room went silent. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came. His mind spun, searching, scrambling. To speak a name was to sign a death warrant. To stay silent was to invite suspicion. Every second stretched like a blade at his throat. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know. I keep my head down. I don't see things." The boss studied him, eyes narrowing. Then he smiled faintly, a smile that chilled more than anger. "Good. Maybe you are too stupid to see. Maybe that's why we keep you around." The others laughed softly, but Angelo didn't. His eyes burned holes in Michael's skin. The meeting ended without verdict, without knives or bullets. Michael stumbled out into the night, shaking, drenched in sweat. He lived, but only just. He knew then that the walls were closing faster than the agents could build their case. The family's suspicion was sharpening, and sooner or later the blade would fall. That night he sat in his apartment staring at the dark. He thought of his daughter, of her small hands once wrapped around his finger. He thought of his mother praying in her chair, candles flickering against her lined face. He thought of the family, the uncles and cousins who had fed him, raised him, laughed with him. He thought of the wire, the machine that hummed cold against his skin, the silent witness to every betrayal. And he thought of himself, trapped between two empires, a man who belonged nowhere, who carried death on both shoulders, who had traded loyalty for survival and found neither. The city outside slept uneasy, as it always did, but Michael didn't sleep. He sat awake until dawn, smoke and silence wrapping him like a shroud, waiting for the inevitable knock that would end everything. The days bled together into a fog of smoke, suspicion, and half-truths. Michael moved through them like a man walking underwater, every sound muffled, every face distorted. He spoke when spoken to, laughed when he had to, but inside he was hollow, a drumbeat of dread echoing louder with each passing hour. He had become two men, the cousin who raised glasses at the family table and the ghost who whispered secrets into a wire. The agents were growing impatient. They wanted closure. Their voices over lukewarm coffee had lost the veneer of patience, stripped down to sharpness. "It's all there," one said. "We have enough to indict, but the DA wants it airtight. One wrong move, and these guys walk. We can't risk that." Michael leaned forward, exhaustion painting shadows under his eyes. "I can't keep this up. They're watching me. Angelo looks at me like he already knows." The agent's reply was cold. "Then don't give him a reason to know. Play your part until we close this. You're too deep to walk away now." Too deep. The words clung to him. He wasn't a man anymore. He was evidence. He was a walking file, a tool that had to be sharpened until the case was done. Survival was secondary. His heart pounded with the realization that both sides, the family and the law, saw him not as Michael, but as something useful, something disposable. Meanwhile, the family tightened its circle. Meetings grew smaller. Conversation stopped when outsiders entered the room. Whispers hung heavier in the air, every laugh edged with suspicion. Angelo pressed harder, cornering him more often, slipping questions into casual talk, fishing for cracks. "You hear anything? You see anyone sniffing around? You sure you're keeping your nose clean?" Michael answered with shrugs, jokes, half-smiles, but his stomach churned, because every time Angelo asked, it sounded less like curiosity and more like an interrogation. Then came the order. The boss summoned Michael late one night, the call short and heavy with weight. When Michael arrived, the study was dim, smoke coiling through the air. The boss sat behind the desk, Angelo at his side, eyes like knives. "There's a name," the boss said. "Someone's been talking. We got word." Michael's throat tightened. His mind screamed questions, but he forced himself to sit still, to breathe. The boss slid a photograph across the desk. A man Michael knew, Tony, a bookmaker on the edge of the family's reach, not blood, but close enough to count. The boss's voice was steady. "We think it's him. You're going to handle it." Michael stared at the photograph. Handle it. The words carried no ambiguity. He was being asked to kill. For a moment, the room spun. The irony burned like acid. He, the real rat, was being ordered to eliminate another, a scapegoat. If he refused, suspicion would land on him. If he agreed, he would cross another line, one that would stain him forever. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right." The boss leaned back, puffing his cigar. "Good. Tomorrow night. Clean, quick. Bring proof." Angelo's eyes bored into him, daring him to falter. That night, Michael stumbled back to his apartment, sweat dripping down his back despite the cold. He sat on the floor, head in his hands, the photograph burning in his pocket. Tony. He thought of the man's laugh, the way he smoked cheap cigarettes down to the filter, the way he always tipped bartenders, more than he had to. Tony was no saint, but he didn't deserve what was coming. The next morning, Michael told the agents, their reaction was not sympathy, but calculation. "This is good," one said. "It proves they trust you. You go through with it, and you'll be untouchable in their eyes. But," he leaned forward, "we don't want Tony dead. We can use this." Michael's voice cracked. "What do you mean, use it?" "We set it up. You take Tony out of the picture without blood. We stage it. He disappears. He testifies later. You bring back something, anything to prove it's done. The family buys it. We keep Tony safe. Everyone wins." "Everyone wins." The words rang hollow. Michael agreed because he had no choice. The following night, he found Tony in a dingy bar, half lit and thick, with a smell of spilled beer. Tony grinned when he saw him, oblivious. "Michael, sit, drink, forget your troubles." Michael sat, hands shaking under the table. They talked, small things, trivial things, the way men talk when they don't know death is sitting between them. Finally, Michael leaned close, whispered the truth. "They think you're the rat. They sent me." Tony froze, the grin draining from his face. "What?" Michael nodded. "If you stay, you're dead. Tonight, tomorrow. Doesn't matter. But the feds, they can pull you out. Witness protection. New life. Only way." Tony's eyes darted around the room, panic rising. He whispered back, "Jesus, Michael. They'll kill us both if they find out." "Not if it looks real," Michael said. "We make it look like I did it. You vanish. They believe. I live. You live." It took hours, whispered plans and frantic pacing in the alley behind the bar. Finally, Tony agreed. The agents staged it carefully. Fake blood, a staged photograph, a car driven away under cover of night. By dawn, Tony was gone, erased, tucked away into the machine of protection. Michael delivered the proof to the boss, a stained shirt, a burned-out cigarette that smelled of blood and gasoline. The boss studied it, nodded once, satisfied. "Good work. Family first." Angelo's eyes lingered longer, colder, as if weighing the truth. But he said nothing. Michael left the house alive, but emptier than before. He had lied to them all, deeper than ever, woven into betrayal so thick it strangled. He wasn't sure if he'd saved Tony or only postponed both their deaths. The agents were pleased. They called it a breakthrough, a sign of deeper trust. They promised again, soon, just a little longer. Michael no longer believed them, but he was trapped, the cage closing from both sides. Days later, the family gathered again. The air was heavier than before, the whispers louder, the laughter forced. The boss spoke of expansion, of new deals, of pushing past the pressure. But the shadows in the room said otherwise. Too many eyes darted, too many hands twitched. They were unraveling, and Michael was the silent knife cutting the threads. That night, as he walked home, he caught his reflection in a shop window. He barely recognized the man staring back, hollow eyes, jaw clenched, skin pale, a ghost wrapped in flesh. He realized then that even if he survived, if the family burned, if the agents kept their promises, he would never be free. The betrayal had carved itself into his bones. Somewhere behind him, footsteps echoed. He turned sharply, heart racing, but the street was empty. Still, the sound lingered in his ears as he walked on, each step heavier than the last. The city was closing in, the walls shrinking, and Michael knew the end was near. Whether it came from a bullet, a knife, or a courtroom, it was already written. One wire had lit the fire, and now the flames were reaching for him too. The city held its breath. The week the indictments dropped. What began as whispers behind courtroom doors became a storm that broke without warning. Names splashed across headlines and block letters, faces once feared, now frozen in mug shots under the glare of fluorescent lights. The family that had walked untouchable through decades of blood and money found themselves dragged into the light by a single invisible thread, a wire no larger than a coin. But the story of their fall was not as simple as headlines made it sound. It was messier, darker, painted in the colors of paranoia and betrayal. A story that devoured not just the dynasty, but the man who had torn it apart. Michael was already unraveling before the news reached the street. Nights bled into each other, sleep stolen by dreams of blood and whispers, mornings drowned in the metallic taste of fear. He replayed every conversation with Angelo, every look from the boss, convinced they had seen through him long ago and were only waiting for the right moment to bury him. The agents fed him updates like scraps tossed to a starving dog. The case was locked, the evidence overwhelming, the dominoes about to fall. "Just hold on a little longer," they said, their voices rehearsed, detached. He held on not because he believed them, but because he no longer knew how to let go. The first arrest came quietly at dawn. 2 black cars pulled up to Angelo's house, the silence of the street shattered by pounding fists and shouted warrants. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as men in suits dragged Angelo out in handcuffs, his hair disheveled, his fury boiling over in curses that echoed against brick walls. He spat at the cameras, shouted about loyalty and rats, but the image was already carved into history. The right hand of the family reduced to a prisoner, his empire dissolving with the click of steel around his wrists. Michael watched it unfold on television alone in his apartment, the glow of the screen painting his hollow face. He wanted to feel relief, to believe it was over, but instead his stomach knotted tighter. Angelo's words rang in his head, rats, betrayal, and he felt exposed, naked in the silence of the room. Within hours, the dominoes fell. Safe houses raided, ledgers seized, men dragged out of restaurants, cars, bedrooms. The old boss himself was taken in, led down the steps of his mansion, while reporters screamed questions and flashbulbs burst like gunfire. His face was pale but composed, a man who had seen wars, betrayals, assassinations, yet never imagined his end would come at the hands of paper, tape, and a whispering voice in the dark. By nightfall, the family was no more. What had taken generations to build collapsed in less than 24 hours, dismantled not by rival gangs or bloody coups, but by evidence whispered into a wire and passed through hidden hands. The streets buzzed with disbelief. Bartenders shook their heads. Old men muttered about the end of an era. Younger men, reckless and hungry, whispered about opportunities rising from the ashes. But for Michael, there was no celebration. His phone buzzed with a single message from the agents. "It's done. Pack your things." He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the suitcase he had never unpacked, the life he had never fully lived. It was supposed to be freedom, a chance to start over, yet it felt like a death sentence. The next 48 hours blurred. He was moved like contraband, driven in the back of unmarked cars through empty highways, checked into nameless motels under names that weren't his. Agents explained the logistics in clipped tones. Relocation, new identity, new job, a town far enough from the echoes of his past. "You'll disappear," they said, as though it were a gift. Michael nodded, silent, because what was there to say? On the third night, he was left alone in a room in a safe house, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He stared at the blank walls, at the suitcase on the floor, and felt the weight of everything pressing down. He thought of the family dinners, of Angelo's laughter before it curdled into suspicion, of Tony's wide eyes in that bar when Michael told him the truth. He thought of the boss, a man who had raised him like blood, sitting now in a cell, staring at nothing. He thought of the wire, the cold little device that had turned his entire world inside out. Sleep never came. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the night bleed into morning, and realized that no matter how far he was moved, no matter what name they gave him, he would always carry the ghost of betrayal. Witness protection was not freedom. It was exile. Meanwhile, the remnants of the family stirred. Not all had been caught. A handful slipped through the cracks, men hardened by years in the shadows. For them, betrayal was not just a crime, but an infection, and infections demanded cleansing. Rumors spread quickly through the underworld. There was an informant, someone inside who had brought the empire to its knees. They didn't know the name yet, but whispers pointed in Michael's direction. Old friends avoided eye contact. Phone calls went unanswered. Silence spread like rot. One evening, weeks after the arrests, Michael walked into a diner in his new town, the name on his ID already foreign on his tongue. He ordered coffee, black, and sat by the window. A man across the room watched him too long, eyes lingering, expression unreadable. Michael's heart raced, palms sweating. He left the coffee untouched and walked out into the night, footsteps echoing behind him, though when he turned, the street was empty. The paranoia never left. Every sound at the door made him flinch. Every unfamiliar car parked on the street made his chest tighten. The agents told him he was safe, that the family was finished, but Michael knew better. Families don't die clean. They leave embers, and embers burn. The trial began months later. Michael was called to testify, his voice shaking as he recounted meetings, deals, conversations captured on tape. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Across the room, the boss sat in his suit, thinner now, but his eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed. Their gaze locked for a moment, and Michael felt as though the man could see straight through him, stripping away the suit, the new name, the lies. For the first time, Michael wondered if prison would truly hold him, if walls and bars were enough to contain the fury of a man who had built empires from nothing. When the gavel fell and the sentences were read, the city exhaled. Life went on. Streets filled, businesses opened, children played. The dynasty was a memory, a cautionary tale whispered in bars and retold in half-true stories. But for Michael, there was no exhale, no return to life. He lived in the margins, a ghost haunting his own skin, trapped in a story that would never end. One night, years later, he sat alone in a small apartment in a small town where no one knew his name. The news flickered on the television reporting another arrest, another betrayal in another city. The faces changed, the names changed, but the story was always the same. Families rose, families fell, loyalty was sworn, loyalty was broken. Michael turned off the screen and sat in silence. In the drawer beside him lay the recorder, the very one that had started it all, kept not as a trophy but as a curse. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, listened to the faint click as it opened. The wire was gone, the tape long since locked in evidence, but the weight of it was still there, heavier than any chain. He whispered into the empty device, his voice breaking. It was never just one wire. It was me. Outside, the night carried on, indifferent, the world moving past him. Inside, Michael sat in the dark, knowing that though the family had fallen, though history had written its lines, he was still trapped in the shadows of that one night, forever bound to the betrayal that had destroyed them all. And somewhere, in the silence, he thought he heard footsteps again. Dynasties don't always die in blood and fire. Sometimes all it takes is a whisper into the dark, a single wire hidden beneath a shirt, a voice that chose betrayal over silence. The family thought themselves untouchable, but their empire wasn't destroyed by bullets, by rivals, or by war. It crumbled under the weight of one man's choice. And though the headlines celebrated justice, the truth was far less clean. The informant lived on, but never free. His punishment wasn't prison but memory, forever trapped in the shadows of what he had done, forever hunted by footsteps that may never come. So when you close your eyes tonight, remember, empires can fall not with a bang, but with a whisper. And sometimes the scariest ghosts are the ones still breathing. Sleep well.